Hi, welcome back to my series on piano basics. In our last video, we covered the basics of note names, intervals, and scales on the piano. If you haven't seen it yet, I strongly recommend you watch it if at any point in this video you feel lost. But anyway, I'm JJ, also known as Techno, and today we'll be diving deeper into the world of piano by discussing scale numbering, chords, chord inversions, and harmonic functions of chords within the scale. These concepts are essential for becoming a more well-rounded and versatile pianist. We have a lot to cover today, so without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing we'll be going over today is scale numbering. Scale numbering is just a way to describe the position of a note in any given scale. Each note in a scale is assigned a number based on its position within the scale, and we call these degrees of the scale. For example, in the key of C major, the note C is the first degree. The note D is the second degree. The note E is the third degree. The note F is the fourth degree, and so on. And if you switch that to D major, you just start at the root. D is the 1, E is the 2, F sharp is the third, and I think you get the point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. All you have to do is count up the scale starting the root, and this works with any scale. This method of numbering notes in a scale is useful for musicians as it allows them to quickly identify the relationship between different notes within a scale and to easily transpose songs into different keys. Additionally, scale numbering is also used in music theory to describe the harmonic function of chords within a scale, the chords rooted on certain degrees having specific characteristics and functions within the harmony of a piece of music. But before we get into that, we're going to have to talk about chords, what major and minor really mean, and how we construct different chords out of intervals. Chords are just a combination of at least 3 notes played together. They can be classified as major, minor, augmented, diminished, or a few other things, depending on the intervals between the notes. A major chord is made up of a root note, a major third interval, and a perfect fifth interval. For example, the C major chord is made up of C, E, and G. However, a minor chord, on the other hand, is made up of a root note, a minor third, and a perfect fifth. For example, A minor. You can also play augmented chords by stacking 2 major thirds on top of one another. And the diminished is kind of the opposite, where you stack 2 minor thirds. Now, if you take a scale and only use the notes from that scale and walk up it to make chords, you get what are called the diatonic chords for the scale you're in. You can assign each of these diatonic chords a number depending on what number the root of that chord is. So, if I was on the 2 in C major, I would be playing a 2 chord. If I was on the 4, I would be playing a 4 chord. And you can notate this using Roman numerals. The number that you write is what degree of the scale you're on, and if it's uppercase, that means it's a major chord, and if it's lowercase, that means it's a minor chord. This can be helpful to remember chord progressions and transpose them into new scales, because relative of the root of the scale, all of the intervals will be the same. So if you know a C major, F major is a 1-4 in the key of C, instead of just being locked into playing C major and F major, you know that you have the first chord and the fourth chord, and that they're both major chords. So I could play a C major, F major, but I can also think about what those chords are in other keys. So if I wanted to transpose that up to D, I would just say, well, what's the root of D? The 1 chord in D is, well, D. And then the 4 would be G. And now I can take that chord progression and play it in any scale that I know. Now that we know about chords, we can discuss new ways to play with them with inversions. A chord inversion refers to the rearrangement of notes within a chord. A chord is usually made up of 3 notes, and sometimes more, but we'll be talking about 3 for this example, and the inversion refers to the order in which these notes are played. The most basic type of chord is called the root position, where the root note of the chord is the lowest note in the chord. For example, in a C major chord, in root position, the C would be the lowest note. An inversion of a chord occurs when one of the other notes in the chord is played as the lowest note instead of the root. For example, with that same C major chord, if E is played as the lowest note, this is called the first inversion, because you've taken the same notes and shifted the bottom up an octave. You can do this another time and play G as the lowest note, and that's called second inversion. Inversions are often used in music to create different harmonic effects and to add movement and more interest to a piece of music. They can also be useful for the pianist to play the chord in a different position on the piano, making it easier to play. For example, there's actually a chord inversion for every chord that barely requires you to move your hand at all. Let's go through them in the key of C major. So you start on your root chord. Easy enough. The 2 is already pretty close, you just shift everything up 1 note. For the 3, you can play it in second inversion, which is basically just your root chord with your bottom finger extended down 1. For the 4 chord, you use your second inversion as well, which is essentially your root chord with your top 2 fingers extended up 1. For the 5, you do first inversion, and it's almost like the opposite of the 4, as the bottom 2 fingers are extended down. The 6 is also first inversion, and you can think of it as the opposite of the 3, because 1 finger is extended up from the root position. You can also do something kinda cool with the 6, and just play the root chord on top of the 6, and get what's called a 6-7, and it's a really nice sounding chord. Now that we've gotten to the 6, the 7 is just shifting down 1 note, kind of like the opposite of the 2. So in order, it would be and with all of those inversions, you can play any diatonic chord in any scale and barely have to move your hand. Now obviously it's not always a perfect solution, and chord voicings are not always going to sound good if you play them the same every time, but it is something to keep in mind if you're having trouble trying to jump your hand around the piano too much, when you could achieve the same thing by keeping it in the same area. Now that we know a little bit more about chords and how to play them, let's get into the harmonic functions of each chord in a scale. Like I said earlier, each diatonic chord in a scale has a specific harmonic function. The names for these functions are tonic, subdominant, and dominant. For example, in the key of C major, the 1 chord is considered the tonic, or the home chord. The 4 chord is considered the subdominant and can give a slight sense of tension and movement. The 5 chord is considered the dominant because it has almost the opposite feeling of rest or resolution, and almost begs for a tonic chord to resolve the instability. The 6 chord is considered tonic as well as the 1, and this is easy to understand because if you remember my last video, the 6th note of any major scale is the start of the relative minor, so if you're in a minor scale, you're going to want to be resting on the minor key, which is the 6th, so it's a tonic chord. The 3 chord is also considered a tonic chord, and you can rest on the 3 very easily. But it also moves nicely to almost any other chord, and has, in my opinion, great versatility to it. You can even go crazy and make a 3 major chord, which isn't diatonic to the scale. Meaning not all of the notes in the chord fall within the scale. because the major 3 in C major is an E major chord, and it has this note that does not fall within the C major scale, but it can still sound pretty good. Two is considered a subdominant chord, but also has great versatility. For example, you can use a 2 major chord to modulate into a new key, the new key being the 5th degree of whatever scale you started with. For example, if I play a 1/6 major 2 5 in the key of C major, I'll get to G if I want to. That's because the 2 major chord's middle note, or third, the major third within the chord, was sharp and conveniently lines up with the scale of G, which is 5 degrees above it. Because G has 1 sharp, and that's this note. The coolest part about this is that it's true for every key, so once you learn a modulation, you can translate it to any key you know. There's also a 7 chord, which is considered dominant, but if you ask me, they should consider it useless.
Audience erupts in laughter.
Now that we have all the necessary information out of the way, I can give you some tips for practicing these concepts. First and foremost, get familiar with the diatonic chords in a key or two. Usually C major, F major, and G major are the easiest ones to get started with. One cool exercise you can do is play a 1/6 major 2 5 in C major, and then from there play in G major. You can even keep doing this, so you can start in C, modulate to G, and then take that same progression, 1/6 major 2 5 in G, and then modulate that up to D. You can mess around with different diatonic chords you know in a key and try and find a progression you like and play melodies over it, or even transpose that same progression to different keys. One really easy and super common progression is the 4-5-1-6. It's used in a lot of pop songs, and if you learn this progression, you can already impress about 80% of people. The possibilities are really endless when you use these diatonic chords and inversions, and if you spend time practicing them, you're bound to find something cool. There was a ton of information here today, and if you don't understand it all the first time through, that's normal. Feel free to watch the video a few times if you need to, or if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll answer them. But before I go, let's do a quick wrap-up of what we discussed today. You can number notes in any major scale from 1 to 7, depending on how far through the scale you are. And you can use these numbers not only to describe the notes themselves, but the diatonic chords that stem from that particular root note. You can notate chords using Roman numerals, the number that you write standing for the root note of the chord in the scale, and the letter case standing for major or minor, uppercase being major and lowercase being minor. Using only the notes within the major scale, you can make 7 basic chords. These chords are diatonic to the scale you are in. You can change the bottom note of a chord in order to invert it, either to make it easier to play or to give it a different voicing. We went over a list of easy-to-play diatonic chord inversions that can make it much less stressful than trying to jump your hands all across the keyboard. We learned about each diatonic chord's function within the harmony of a song, and how some chords have a feeling of rest, some have a feeling of unrest, and some are in between. And we also learned a few things you can do to practice. But before this video gets too long, I think I'm legally obligated to ask you to like the video and to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.